So the question is, where did this unique tradition of Groundhog Day originate? Ariane Daytil traces the history of the day.
Let's talk a little Groundhog Day. In a few days, a slumbering groundhog will emerge, giving us a prediction for the rest of winter.
No matter how you measure, it's 6 more weeks of winter weather.
Groundhog Day in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. No question. That is the party of the year anywhere in the world.
The small town of Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania, comes alive every February 2nd. Crowds gather, bundled in thick coats, eagerly watching as a single creature, a groundhog named Punxsutawney Phil, emerges from his burrow. The question on everyone's mind, will he see his shadow? If he does, we face 6 more weeks of winter. If not, an early spring awaits. It's a quirky tradition that captures the imagination of millions, a charming celebration of folklore and fun. But what if I told you that the origins of Groundhog Day are far stranger, more controversial, and more mysterious than you could imagine? What if this tradition, so deeply embedded in American culture, actually traces its roots back to ancient rituals, shrouded in secrecy and mystery? The tale begins long before Punxsutawney Phil ever emerged from his burrow. The origins of Groundhog Day stretch back to the distant past, to the cold, dark days of winter in Europe. The holiday has its roots in Imbolc, a Celtic festival celebrating the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. This was no ordinary celebration. It was a time of profound rituals, where the ancient Celts believed that the world was teetering on the edge of renewal. Imbolc was dedicated to Brigid, the goddess of fertility, fire, and poetry, who was said to control the rhythms of nature. During this time, sacred rites were performed to ensure the survival of crops and livestock through the harshest of winters. But one of the more unusual rituals involved the observation of animals, particularly those that emerged from hibernation. It wasn't just any animal that was watched closely. People looked to creatures like badgers, hedgehogs, and even bears. These animals, believed to possess mystical powers, were seen as harbingers of seasonal change. If the animal emerged from its den and saw its shadow, it was considered a sign that winter would linger a little longer. If it didn't, the promise of spring seemed closer at hand. But how did the tradition of the groundhog, a creature native to North America, become the central figure in this age-old ritual? It's here that history takes an unexpected turn. When German immigrants, known as the Pennsylvania Dutch, arrived in the United States in the 18th century, they brought with them their own version of the ancient Imbolc traditions. But instead of watching the usual hibernating animals, they adopted the groundhog, a plentiful creature in the region, as their own weather predictor. Yet this adaptation wasn't seamless. The choice of the groundhog was met with skepticism. It was a rodent, after all, hardly the revered animal of ancient pagan rites. Yet, as the tradition took root, the strange mix of European paganism, folklore, and colonial American customs created the modern-day celebration we now know as Groundhog Day. As the years passed, the rituals grew less mysterious and more theatrical. What was once a solemn and sacred observance became a public spectacle. The groundhog became a star, not just of folklore, but of public life, drawing crowds from near and far to witness the annual event. But the big question remains: what do we truly know about the origins of Groundhog Day? Could there be even deeper connections to older, more obscure rituals hidden beneath the layers of history? Is there more to this quirky tradition than meets the eye? The mysterious origins of Groundhog Day.
You know, some of the traditions and things about the very beginning of this holiday, and actually some interesting ways that they actually used to celebrate. Now, the first known trek to Gobbler's Knob for the holiday is known, the year is known as 1887, but actually this tradition started way further back in history.
There was a saying in Europe that if the sun shone on Candlemas Day, there would be 2 winters.
The Pennsylvania Dutch weren't the only ones who had adopted this weather-predicting tradition. Similar practices existed across Europe, though they were far more obscure. In Germany, it was believed that if a hedgehog emerged from its burrow and saw its shadow, the cold weather would hold on a little longer. But here's where it gets strange. These superstitions weren't just about weather prediction. In certain parts of Europe, particularly in the Alps and northern France, the tradition was tied to the ancient concept of animism, the belief that all living creatures, especially those in the wild, held divine significance. The animals were seen as messengers of the gods, intermediaries between the human world and the supernatural. The appearance or disappearance of an animal, especially one that hibernated during the winter, was considered a powerful omen tied to the very cycles of life, death, and rebirth. In fact, some scholars argue that the groundhog tradition might be connected to a far older practice, an ancient ritual in which the emergence of an animal marked the awakening of nature. The earth itself was believed to sleep through the harsh winter, only to be awakened by the sight of an animal stirring from its long hibernation. So, what does this all mean for the modern-day tradition of Groundhog Day? Some experts believe the rituals surrounding hibernating animals were the basis for the weather-predicting aspect of Groundhog Day. But here's the twist. Some of the darker, more hidden elements of these ancient customs weren't passed down to the modern tradition. Ritual sacrifices, mysterious symbols, and other worldly chants were once part of the ceremonies. But today, we only know the charming, whimsical side of it all. The idea of a cute groundhog predicting the seasons. What happened to the darker aspects of the tradition? Did they get lost in translation over time, or did someone purposely hide them? The mysterious origins of Groundhog Day. What many don't realize is that, much like the groundhog itself, the very tradition of predicting the seasons has its roots in something far more ancient than simple weather predictions. In the old days, these rituals were performed not just for the survival of crops, but for the balance of life itself. It was believed that the earth had an invisible energy, an unseen force that needed to be respected and coaxed into renewal. The rituals performed around hibernating animals were seen as a means to awaken this dormant energy and ensure the continuation of life. These ancient traditions were rooted in pagan beliefs, where the natural world was seen as interconnected with the spiritual realm. The changing of seasons was not merely a physical event, it was a cosmic one. The earth was viewed as a living entity, and the animals, particularly those that hibernated, were believed to hold the keys to nature's cycles. It was thought that by watching these creatures emerge from their winter slumber, humans could gain insight into the forces at play in the universe. Forces that dictated the rhythm of life, death, and rebirth. However, there's a deeper, more controversial theory that has emerged in recent years. Some historians and anthropologists have speculated that the Groundhog Day tradition was once linked to a much older practice, one tied to sacrificial rites. According to this theory, certain animals, including the groundhog, were once seen as symbolic representations of death and rebirth. The act of predicting the end of winter could have been directly connected to the idea of making offerings to the gods, with the groundhog playing a role in this sacrificial cycle. In many ancient cultures, animals were used as intermediaries between humans and the gods. They were seen as vessels for spiritual power. The idea of making offerings, whether in the form of sacrifices or symbolic rituals, was central to ensuring the favor of the divine. The groundhog, emerging from its burrow, was a symbol of life returning after death. In some ancient traditions, the groundhog's emergence was tied to a ritual of renewal, in which the earth itself was sacrificed to ensure the survival of crops and the continuation of life. It's a chilling thought. Could Groundhog Day have started as a grim ritual, where the fate of the earth, of life itself, was in the hands of the animals? Could these seemingly innocent predictions of shadows once have held far more dire consequences? Were the predictions of an early spring or extended winter once part of a ritual meant to ensure the balance of life and death, an offering to appease the gods? The shadow cast by the groundhog might have once been interpreted as a message from the divine, a sign of the world's continued balance, or a warning of a troubled year ahead. Today, Groundhog Day has shed these ominous roots. What remains is a light-hearted tradition, a fun and quirky spectacle that draws crowds year after year. Yet, beneath the cheerful facade, there remains a lingering sense of mystery. What truths have been lost? What secrets remain hidden in the ancient rituals of the past? As you celebrate with friends and family, watching Phil predict the weather for the coming weeks, consider this. The origins of Groundhog Day may not be as simple as we think. The truth, buried deep in the mists of time, could be far stranger and far more fascinating than anything we've come to know today. What we celebrate as a whimsical event might be tied to a much older, more powerful connection to nature that still lingers beneath the surface, waiting to be rediscovered. If you enjoyed uncovering the hidden history of Groundhog Day, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more fascinating stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below.